let's revisit brushstrokes and let's do it with watercolour this time. So last week I was using some simple mark making with my brushes and acrylic paint to build an abstract mixed media piece. This week I've reached for my watercolour paints and a mop brush, and I have 3 examples to share with you of how you can make some very simple but striking art by just playing with these simple supplies. And also, whilst we're doing it, I thought we could have a chat about watercolour brushes, paint, paper, all sorts of things. So let's get to it. Now, I've left my personal favourite of these 3 pieces to last, but I want to know what your favourite is. So I'll show all 3 pieces at the end of the video. And yeah, let me know which one kind of stands out for you the most and which one sort of pops. Maybe it's all 3, maybe there's a couple, I don't know. But let me know in the comments below because, well, basically I'm just super nosy and I would love to know. So this first one is a wet on dry project, and everything I am using, it's all in the description below. And for this one I'm sticking to one type of brush. It's my trusty Raven mop brush from Jackson Art, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that, I just really love this brush. I've got it in 2 sizes here on my desk today. There's a 0 and then there's the smaller one, which is the 10/0. And I don't know how you're supposed to say that, 10/0. And I'm going to be swapping between both of these for the 3 projects, so keep an eye on where I use them and for what kind of jobs, just in case I don't mention it as we go along. With this piece, I start with some very simple lines, and I'm varying the line by letting the brush head spread on the paper with pressure, then lifting it off and applying less pressure to let it tail into a thinner line, and that's just a really great way of varying how you use it. I know, right? I told you I'm getting pretty obsessed with brush strokes at the moment and mark making. I'm just loving lines. Just paint lines, pen lines, pencils, crayons, whatever it is. I don't know what it is about them. I'm just having so much fun with my mark making. So I hope I can persuade you to as well. Now, I don't always do that tailing off of the stroke. So not every line has that tailing off going on. So there's some variation there as well. And another thing that you can play about with is the paint load again. So just as we looked at last week, paint load can vary up how this looks as well. And sometimes I might add more water to the brush without refreshing the paint and just sort of vary it up and see what I can do. Now, watercolour mop brushes are designed to hold a large amount of water and pigments, so you don't always need to refresh either, and that's just another thing that you can play about with in your strokes. I mean, all it really needs is for you to sort of sit down and do some experimenting and playing and seeing what you like and, you know, exactly how much water you want on the brush and how much pigment you want on the brush and things like that. So unlike the acrylic paint example, the brushes I was using for that project, well, they don't hold a lot of water. So you can play around with dry brushing in your mark making with those brushes really nice and easily. And you can with watercolour as well. And if you want to see how that looks, then go watch my last watercolour swatching video. And at around about time point 3:20, I am doing some watercolour dry brushing with a small synthetic brush. And I'll link it up in the description and the cards for the curious amongst you. Now, don't get confused, this is also a synthetic hairbrush, this particular mop that I'm using, and it uses no animal products in making of this brush, which is another reason why I absolutely love this brush. But it's been designed to be juicy and hold lots and lots of water, so it's great for this kind of play. Watercolour brushes can be synthetic hair, animal hair, or a mix of each, and each one has its own pros and cons, and I think it's really down to personal preference in the end with what you like, how you like to use it as well. And it takes a bit of trial and error, which unfortunately isn't cheap. So watch your favourite artists and see what they use. Although this isn't a guarantee always, because, you know, you might get the brush and not like it yourself. Or sometimes it also takes you a while to get used to brushes, and there's some brushes that I've got when I first got them I didn't really like them, and it took me a while to sort of work out how I could use them. So if you do have some old brushes in your stash that you haven't used for a while, it might be worth going back to them and seeing if you do like them now after sort of, you know, you've got moved a bit further on in your skills, and you never know, you might find ways to appreciate them and use them. Oh, then again, you might not. Now for the second abstract, we are going wet on wet, so I start by adding water with the brush in shapes that I want on my paper. Then I'm just going to drop the paint in and just let that paint spread. And I don't know what it is, but I love watching paint spread through water. There's something really lovely about it, isn't there? And some of you might have already spotted that I'm using the Prima Marketing paint, and this is the Decadent Pies set. And these are more towards a student grade watercolour paint, so they're less pigmented than an artist quality paint. So you do have to work at getting intense tones with these and saturations. It's because they've got less pigment in them, it takes a little bit more work. And also, I mean, the Prima Marketing paints, they just name their paints randomly and for marketing reasons, I'm sure. And they don't tell you what pigments are in them, or what their light, fast qualities are either. But I really do adore this colour palette and I really enjoy using them. Eventually I will get around to colour matching them with an artist quality paint, but I just haven't done it yet. And I tend to use a mix of artist, student and craft quality products in my work. And your choice as to which you use will really depend on your own personal preferences, your budget, of course, and then there's the life cycle of the project that you're making as well to consider. For example, if you need something to be light fast, because maybe it's going up on a wall or something like that, unprotected, then you need to do your research and use products that are going to be okay in that situation. And finding your favourite watercolour paint, well, there's a lot of trial and error with this too, just like with the brushes. So I've used a range, as I said, of artist, student and craft. I do personally prefer, there are artist quality paints that I do enjoy using, so I kind of tend to gravitate more to those. Sometimes I've found that using cheaper student and craft quality paints can be a little frustrating, particularly when you're starting out. I mean, it doesn't kind of go together, does it? Because you buy them because they're cheaper, but then you find them really hard to use and you don't get the looks that you think you should be getting. So it kind of puts you off. You think there's something wrong with you and it puts you off using them. So it's a bit of a weird sort of situation there. I mean, there are some really good, cheaper paints, but there's also some that you might find frustrating. So when my budget allows, I do sort of veer more towards the artist quality ones, or if I know of a student level one that works really well and will do the job that I want it to do, then I'll go with that. And if you get the opportunity to sort of try out some artist quality ones, like maybe you've got a friend who does watercolours as well, see if you can go round to theirs and try them out. So I'm keeping all these three pieces really very simple and very abstract, and just kind of using the watercolour itself and the properties of watercolour paint to build these pieces. But yet there's a composition element to this as well, and there's something about this and how it looks that just kind of works, isn't there? And composition has been on my mind because this month over on Patreon I'm going to be sharing some of my favourite composition and design tips with the Art Explorer level. So I thought we could dig into some of those, and then what I thought would be fun is that we could also have a look at these three pieces and analyse what it is that works about them at the Process Addicts level. So if you wanted to sort of go into composition in a little bit more detail, then go check that out. And there's a link to my Patreon page at the end of the video and also in the description too. So we've covered what paint I'm using, we've covered the brushes that I'm using, but the other thing that really affects this piece and all three of these pieces is the paper that I'm using. And I'm a big advocate for trying out the paper that you have in your stash, even if it isn't actually designed for watercolour, because you can find some really fun textures and techniques that can add to your personal art style. And watercolour paper is expensive because it takes a lot to make it. And just like with the paint and the brushes, it can really be down to personal preference as well, and your art style and the techniques that you like to use. These are going to dictate what kind of papers you take to. But I really love the kind of textures that you can get with student quality papers, because they tend to absorb the water in a different way to artist quality paper. And I just like that. So for example, this paper that I'm using in these 3 abstracts, it's called a studio paper, and it's kind of placed sort of better than student quality, maybe sort of like a top end of student quality perhaps. So it runs a bit cheaper than artist quality paper because it's a mix of fibres. So this particular one is cotton and cellulose. And you can see that the pigment sort of blooms out really easily on this paper, and I really love that, but I know that some people don't, and they try to avoid blooms. So experiment with papers too, as they can make a massive difference to how your work looks and what techniques you're going to use. And we haven't even talked about surface textures, but maybe we'll need to do that on another video, because I wasn't really intending to go into massive detail, but just give you some pointers at what you could try and experiment with as well. Now don't forget to let me know which of these is your favourite pieces, which one kind of pops out for you, and if you feel like it, tell me why as well. I would love to hear. And if you want some more inspiration for your watercolouring projects, then watch this playlist and I will see you there.